This is lecture number 4 in our series of preparation videos, and this lecture will focus specifically on Jerusalem, the geography of Jerusalem and some of the history of Jerusalem. And again, as I'll try to make the point here shortly, we will focus a great deal. I think it's fair to say that in comparison to other study trips, we spend a slightly inordinate amount of time in Jerusalem. But we do it very deliberately. The city is so important, and I want you to get to know it well. So we'll begin, and I'm going to go quickly through this PowerPoint. It does match, not immediately, but the material that I'm going to give you in these 2 parts to Lecture 4 is recorded, or you can find it in the printed notes, which are available to you there on the Moodle site. The printed notes on Jerusalem. So I think you'd be wise to download and have them at hand, and you might have to stop and find the right spot in the notes now again. But let me begin. Jerusalem is, I want to begin with the geography of the city, but and let me say that I'm borrowing here in significant measure from some PowerPoints put together by my dear friend Todd Bolin. He's given me permission. And we begin with some passages that make the point, and I'm going to go quickly through these, but I will carefully emphasize while we are there, when we get to Jerusalem, that this city, the city of Jerusalem, ought to be above all other cities, the most precious city on earth to a believer, because it is the place where God placed his name. It is the place where the Messiah gave his life. And it is the place where in a day to come, Messiah, King Jesus, is going to rule. So with all of, it's a crowded city, ancient and modern all at once. It's bustling and noisy and irritating. It's mystical when it goes quiet on the Sabbath. We'll spend a number of days there. We'll be without a bus. We'll live inside the Jaffa Gate. You'll walk that city. I'll give you the requirements for those who are taking it for credit to actually search out some places on your own. So you'll get to know this city, and I covered it for you, but I want you to know this going in. That is, we're going to give you the basic geography, but in Matthew chapter 5, in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus allowed that Jerusalem is the city of the great king. That king is Yahweh. It's where King Yahweh ruled from the temple. He began at Shiloh in the tabernacle, but then in the days of David and then Solomon, the city of Jebus was taken, the temple was built, the glory cloud moved in, and for those hundreds of years, King Yahweh made Jerusalem his throne room, the city of the great king. As a matter of fact, in 2 Chronicles 6, God insists that he has chosen Jerusalem for his name to be there. Folks, there is not, there never will be another city on all of the earth where it can be said that in this profound sense, God has chosen that city for his name to be there. It is true of Jerusalem. Again, the psalmist, the sons of Korah here, calls it the city of our God. The Lord loves the gates of Zion. David rejoices over the fact that Yahweh is enthroned in Zion. And folks, I can't say it doesn't fit right here, but I got to stop and say it. It's literal. When David was singing, he was anxious to bring the ark up. He had brought the ark up, and he was anxious to build that temple. And he was anticipating the day when King Yahweh, in the person of the glory cloud, would move into his throne room and dwell on his throne, which was the Ark of the Covenant. He is enthroned in Zion. We'll talk about this word Zion. It got misplaced. We'll talk more about it, but in David, in the Bible, it means this Jerusalem, oftentimes the actual Temple Mount. Again, other psalmists acknowledge that the stones of Jerusalem are dear to your servants, which is kind of evocative because we're going to spend a lot of time contemplating those stones. In Mark, as Jesus is leaving the city of Jerusalem on Tuesday afternoon, his disciples turn around and look back, and they said, "Behold, what stones and what buildings." And it is absolutely remarkable. And then, of course, you have the famous Psalm in 137 sung by the exile pilgrims, where they say, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." What makes Jerusalem special? What makes any city special? Its scenery, perhaps its history. I'm a Cubs fan. The series starts tonight. Chicago, I was there yesterday, and it's a special city in some ways. That's not what makes Jerusalem special. There's a lot of history, and it's beautiful in its own distinctive ways. But what makes it special, and the reason we ought never to forget it, is because this is where God placed his name. This is where men went in days gone by, and where they will go in days yet to come to meet before Yahweh the King in the person of the glory cloud during the days of the theocracy, in the person of Mashiach Yeshua in the days to come. So Isaiah says the same thing. For Zion's sake, I'll not keep silent. All right, with that background, just to sort of focus your mind and heart just a little bit, perhaps, on the importance of this city, let me take you to some notes here. And first of all, Jerusalem's location. All right, I've highlighted Jerusalem here in the middle. You can find it by going to the northern tip of the Dead Sea and looking just a little bit to the west, if you're on a map where it's hard to find. But let me point out a couple of important elements. Number one, with regard to the location, its proximity to major routes. Interestingly enough, Jerusalem is not on a major route. Now, it's close to a couple of very important major routes. And I say major routes, it's internal. There are no, all right, I have to qualify that. All right, I'll go a little further, but its importance is not primarily a function of the fact that it lies right on top of a very important trade route. That's not its primary importance. As a matter of fact, it very deliberately does not. Now, again, I'll say this, that it lies just to the east of the major internal north-south route. Now, what do we mean by internal? It means, again, we will distinguish between internal and international routes. And very simply, internal routes go village to village. International routes go country to country. Now, that's fairly intuitive, but it's very important. There is a route which carries some international trade, which is just to the north of Jerusalem. We get to it. But on the other hand, it lies very, very close to an internal route, the internal route, called the Ridge Route, or the Way of the Patriarchs, or the Water Parting Route. Now, again, I'm going to give it to you. Watch the map. Here it comes from the north, starts at the Valley of Jezreel, and it makes its way down through Samaria, Ephraim, just to the west of Jerusalem, and then all the way down to the Negev. And that is what we call the Ridge Route. We've talked about this before because of the lay of the land, because the valleys are so steep and the hillsides are so rugged and sawtoothed and terraced and so on. You have to follow the ridges. And there is one ridge route that men have always, to this day, from antiquity, from Abraham till today, follow when they go north and south. Now, to be sure, with modern technology and engineering techniques, sometimes they straighten the road out and so on. But it basically follows that same series of ridges, north and south. So it's impossible to overstate the importance of the Ridge Route. It's called the Ridge Route because it follows these ridges going north and south, sometimes called the Way of the Patriarchs, because this is, in fact, the way that the patriarchs and everybody since has had to travel internally, village to village, north to south in Jerusalem, in Israel, and often called the Water Parting Route because it is basically the spiny backbone ridge, so that water that falls to the west is going to flow to the Mediterranean Sea, and water that flows to the east is gonna, and there are some, we've talked about this, there are some caveats to that, but basically it is the water parting route. Now, I'm going to say again, Jerusalem is not on the water parting route. It is one valley separate, that is separated from, and that is the Valley Hinnom. We'll talk about it in just a moment. On the other hand, there is an important east-west route, as it were. Now watch, I'm going to show you again, but this route right here, this route in blue, is basically, it follows, I say here, it's an east-west route, much traveled by the camel caravans. So coming up from the south through the Nabatean heartland where they facilitated these camel caravan routes, and then crossing over the Jordan Rift and making its way up a valley, a road that climbs from Jericho up to the central Benjamin Plateau, just a few miles, 7, 8 miles north of Jerusalem. And then it makes its way down a couple of passes, primarily the Beit Horon route, the Ajalon Valley, and makes its way down. And of course, this is the grand north-south highway we've talked about before, the Via Maris. So this route is important, and it does carry some trade. So it's something of an international route, but it's not a well-traveled international route. And again, Jerusalem is not even an important stop on this route because it's a few miles to the south. But nonetheless, it is important that the city of Jerusalem lies, I'm going to say it again, just to the east of this north-south route, which is the Ridge route, and just to the south of this east-west. It's east-west in Israel. It's making its way up in the south, then cutting across the hill country, making its way down the Ajalon, and thus down to the and here it's either going to go down, as it says here, to Alexandria or up to Tyre. In other words, these caravans are looking for shipping. They're looking for a port. This is, by the way, why it's so important that Herod the Great built a harbor at Caesarea Maritima and captured this trade and made himself bottomlessly wealthy, adding to the wealth that he already had. So, at any rate, in the first place, Jerusalem is not on an important route, but it is just off the north-south route, the Ridge route, and it's just south a little bit of the camel caravan route, the spice trade route. And then finally, it's important to understand as to its location, that's what we're talking about, that it is interesting and very instructive. And though it's not, the Bible's not explicit, I think we can make a very good conjecture as to why David chose this city. Now, we're going to talk about this as we go through the history, but after David becomes king over all 12 tribes, 2 Samuel chapter 5, one of his first acts is to capture a little city, which had been hitherto, up until that point, still occupied and controlled by a Canaanite people called the Jebusites. And he takes Jebus and he makes it his capital. Why? Well, 3 reasons that are usually identified. Number one, it's a central location. This is very important. Ultimately, and I believe that David had this in his mind from the beginning, the worship of King Yahweh would be located here. That's going to happen actually in the days of Solomon, but I think David intended that. Second, I mean, even in choosing the city, I think it was part of the consideration. Secondly, it's important that the city is not in Judah. David was a Judahite. He had reigned at Hebron for 7 years. But had he chosen a Judahite city, it would have seemed horribly favoritistic or nepotistic. Is there such a word as favoritistic? It would have been favoritism. So there seems wisdom, and yet again, it's very close to Judah. It's one valley away. It is bordered, as you'll see in a moment, on the south by the Hinnom Valley, and that is the border between Judah to the south and Benjamin to the north. So it's not in Judah, it's in Benjamin. Jerusalem, Jebus is in Benjamin, and thus there is some political savvy, if you don't mind, to making his capital in a tribe other than his own. And of course, the reason it was an important city so long before David is because it is defensible as the hills and the valleys that provides the defense on 3 sides, south, west, and east, and then also a good water supply with the spring that we'll talk much about called the Gihon. So much so for Jerusalem's location. Let's just review. It's not on a major highway, but it is very, very close to a north-south highway, the water parting route, the ridge route, and it's just south of an east-west route in the land, the spice trade route, and there are some discernible reasons why it was strategically wise for David to make it his city. Now, we're going to talk about its topography. Before we do, I want to introduce you to something, and this is unspeakably pedantic, but that's what this lecture is all about, pedantry. But I want you to get this. This is important. Look, in almost every map, that's not quite true, in so many of the maps we will consider, maps that are trying to depict Jerusalem in antiquity, there will be included this strange, almost trapezoidal shape right here. That's what I'm pointing out to you. This trapezoidal shape, including this rectangle right here. So again, I highlight it electronically thusly. What is that? That is Those are the modern city walls. Now, we talk about the modern city walls. They were built in the 1540s. They were built by a Turkish conqueror named Suleiman the Magnificent. Whoops. And so they're modern in a rather Eastern sense. But the point is that you have these limestone, crenellated, very evocative walls that surround the old city, as it's called, or the Jerusalem of the Bible. And they're in the wrong place. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to bang away at this the whole time. But on the west and on the east, get out of here, Bookman, on the east, they basically follow the lines of the ancient, that is, this 1540s wall system basically follows the lines of antiquity, both Old Testament and New Testament. On the south and on the north, they are totally out of place. So we'll talk more about that, but all I want you to see is that again and again, it will be the habit of various geographers and map makers to sort of lightly superimpose on a map of antiquity this strange shape, which is the modern walls, because they want you to be able to orient yourself. Your mind, your eyes are going to be captured as we're walking around by those modern walls, and you have to understand that they are misplaced. And so again and again, and I think it's a wise thing to do. Map makers will do this for us. All right, so we're going to talk about Jerusalem's topography, which means its shape, the shape of the surface of the earth. And here is a map, for instance. This is Old Testament Jerusalem, but I'll develop this. But let me say this, and get it, folks. Jerusalem is 2 hills and 3 valleys. And so I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you, we're going to do a little introductory exercise. And I want you to get something to draw and get a pencil or a pen and do this with me. I know it's puerile, it's a little silly, but I think it helps, so I'm begging you. And when you get done, you can wad it up and throw away. That's not the point, but I want you to do this with me just as a learning exercise. So this is what I want you to draw, all right? Take a piece of paper and draw on the left or west side a huge, I don't know, a half oval, a sort of a huge ear, and label it WR, and then to do the same thing, give yourself a little room in between on the right or east side, and call it MO, and I'll tell you why. All right, what are these? These are presidential size ears, aren't they? But they are the bordering hills. Now get this, you need to know this. There is a hill on the east side, which is the Mount of Olives, and a hill on the west side. Again, that's a mess. This is north, so here is east, and here is west. Out here is the Mediterranean. Down here is the Jordan Rift off this way. So again, here you have, on the one hand, on the west side, you have this bordering hill, which is the watershed ridge. Folks, this is that water parting route. This is the ridge route just to the west of Jerusalem. But you got to know, it's a bordering hill. On the east is another bordering hill. As a matter of fact, it's identified 3 times in the Old Testament as the hill which lies on the east of Jerusalem, and we know it as the Mount of Olives. Now, we're going to break that down. There are actually 3 discernible ridges. All right, now I want you to go further. I want you to draw a little bean-shaped, just position about as I position. Don't worry about being exact, all right? But on the eastern or right side of the picture, a little bean-shaped shape, and label it CD, and then a slightly larger bean-shaped shape to the north of it, and call it TM, all right? And then a larger rounded rectangle to the west or to the left, and make sure you leave room in between because these are valleys. Call it WH. What's that? These are the 2 hills. All right, let me give them to you. They are, first of all, the 2 hills, because I said Jerusalem, what is it? 2 hills, 3 valleys. 2 hills, 3 valleys. Learn it, love it, live it, whatever we say. All right, so what are these 2 hills? Well, number 1, there is the little CD, City of David. Now it's about 9 acres. It's the only city that David, it's Jebus. It was the city that David captured from the Jebusites. It was walled. It had, as a matter of fact, here I'm going to be dramatic in a sort of a primitive way. And this little feature here that I have sweeping in, I'm just trying to mark the approximate location of the spring. What made this city important, or why it was a city, is because you had deep valleys, which produced high hills, which meant you could defend it, build the walls atop those hills. And secondly, you had a ready source of water, the Gihon Spring, lovely spring to the east of the city. All right, so that's the city of David. Along comes Solomon. First of all, David purchased a threshing floor to the north, and then Solomon builds a temple up there and walls it in. So TM is Temple Mount. Now that's one hill. I said 2 hills, 3 valleys. These two together are the eastern hill. I'm going to make that point in a moment. As a matter of fact, there it is, that together, the city of David and the Temple Mount together are the eastern hill. On the other hand, the WH is the western hill. It is a much higher, much more pleasant, flatter, more easily inhabited, but no water. Doesn't have a water source. But at any rate, that's the western hill. So now we're going to add the valleys. Let's say again, 2 hills, 3 valleys. 2 hills, the eastern hill, which is the Temple Mount to the north, the city of David to the south, and then the western hill. All right, here are the 3 valleys. Let's start on the west. Now, let me just say, we're going to come to this in just a moment, but the city did not always occupy both of those hills. But when it did, the valley, it always occupied this. It often occupied this, but only occasionally did it occupy that. Well, so the point is, when the city grew to the western hill, then it was flanked on the west by a valley called the Hinnom. Well, let's call it HV. I'll maintain the breathless suspense here. And then between the between the eastern hill and the Mount of Olives on the eastern side of the city is another valley, and we're going to call it KV. And then between the 2 hills, between the eastern hill, Temple Mount, city of David, and the western hill, is another valley that we're going to call CV. All right, I think you know this, but let me give you these. These are the 3 valleys. The 3 valleys are, number 1, I want you drawing this, folks. If you're not drawing this, go wash your mouth out with soap. I don't know, do something. All right, HV is the Hinnom Valley. I've already said it. H-I-N, sometimes spelled different ways, but sometimes Hinnom, but we usually know it as the Hinnom Valley. Very important in Scripture. Notice that the Hinnom Valley guards the city when the city grows to the western hill on both the west and the south. It starts on the west, sweeps around to the south. So the Hinnom Valley. And then you have on the east, between the Mount of Olives and the eastern hill, here you have this valley, which is the Kidron Valley. All right, KV, the Kidron. That's the drainage ditch for the Temple Mount and so on. All right, and then you have the valley in between the 2 hills, which is the Central Valley, sometimes called the Cheesemakers Valley, sometimes called the Tyropean, which is Greek for something. All right, there you have it, folks. And now watch what happens here. I'm going to superimpose this. I've cheated just slightly. But watch what happens. Here it is over an actual map. So I've used that map. Because again, here you have the city of David. It's just this little tiny piece of land. David buys a threshing floor up to the north, and Solomon ultimately builds a temple up there and walls it in. So now you have, that's the eastern hill together, those 2. Notice, by the way, if you can see it, that on our map here, it's called Mount Moriah, which is in Genesis 22, where Abraham is dispatched to offer up his son Isaac, and it is also in 2 Chronicles 3, where, according to 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, Solomon built the temple. He built it on Mount Moriah, and that's why we connect those 2 events. So the point is, that's the eastern hill. And then as you see here, I'm just, again, here's what we drew. Here I'm just imposing, I'm bringing up the map, because here again is this large western hill, and it, again, it's much more pleasant and so on. And then here you can see, again, here's what we drew. Here are these 3 valleys. The Hinnom over here, Kidron over here, the Central Valley here. So not to belabor the point, but do you get it? 2 hills, 3 valleys. The two hills are the Eastern Hill, Temple Mount, City of David, the Western Hill, and then there's three valleys. And again, this is where the bordering hills, the Mount of Olives and the Watershed Ridge, become important, because it is the Kidron Valley is defined by the fact that you've got this bordering hill, the Mount of Olives, rising up to the east, and the Hinnom Valley is a valley because it lies between this western hill and then the Watershed Ridge that rises up to the west. All right, so again, I want to make the point, here are the City of David, the Temple Mount, and the City of David, but together, those are the Eastern Hills. So you got the Eastern Hill, the Western Hill. All right, two hills, three valleys. Have I driven you nuts? But you got to get it. And we're going to walk around it now, because I'm not going to let you off easy. Here's another map. Lane Rittmeyer's, it's not a map, it's a drawing, but it does a very, very nice job of it. So I'm going to rehearse it again. Now, before I do anything else, notice what we've got here. You got to be recognizing many of these features now. Here is the City of David. Here's the Mount Moriah, the Ophel. By the way, the Ophel is the region that rises up to the City of David. The Mount Moriah, the place where the temple sat, is actually a good deal north, couple hundred yards north of the City of David. And so the region in between is today called the Ophel. But at any rate, this together, Eastern Hill. Here's your Western Hill. Here's the Hinnom Valley. Here's the Central Valley. Here's the Kidron Valley. I'm making a mess of it, but it's a nice drawing to give you that same topography. Now, I'm going to do the same thing quickly. On the east and the west, you have these neighboring hills, these bordering hills, I like to call them. They are the Watershed Ridge to the west. That's the way to the water parting route. To the east is the Mount of Olives. Remember that this then falls off to the Mediterranean. This falls off to the Jordan River. Then you have the City of David and the Mount Moriah, just as we pointed out. And then, of course, the larger, more pleasant Western Hill. And once again, I'm going to give you the Spring Gihon on the City of David, on David's Jebus. And then maybe I'm a little north there, a little south of it, but there's the Hinnom. And here comes I'm doing the same thing here. I guess I should have made that. I think I might have shrunk it. But at any rate, here are our three valleys. So, all right. So we'll leave that. So I go back to it. Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to say it again. Two hills and three valleys. Here's the Eastern Hill. And at this point, quite frankly, I'm reviewing, but I'm using Todd's work here. So he's building on this picture. So again, I'm going to do it again. And I want you to get used to this. And notice, by the way, just real quickly, that in this particular picture, we used it before. Here is that trapezoidal. It's not exactly a trapezoid, but here are the modern city walls with the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is exactly where it was in Herod's day. But, and again, the walls are pretty well positioned on both the west and the east. On the north and the south, they are horribly ill positioned. We'll talk more about it. But let's do the same thing. Hold on, folks. This is review. So tarry your hair for just a minute. Here are the two hills, the Eastern Hill, the Western Hill, and again, this is Todd's. I really like this map. Again, I think you've got it by now. This is Bill's map, by the way. This is from the Bible Atlas. But again, what you have here are these modern walls. The bold black line, this right here, is the modern city walls, the 1540s, and they're there today. As a matter of fact, we will go in the Jaffa Gate right here again and again. Right here will be the hotel where we'll be staying when we're in Jerusalem. We'll walk down this road right here. Today it's David Street to get down to the Western Wall and so on. But know that, now compare that. Let's just take a minute. Here is your Eastern Hill. See it there? City of David. And then this is the Temple Mount, dominated today by Islam holy sites. And then you have the Western Hill. This is the Western Hill here. Then you have the Hinnom Valley. You have the Central Valley. And over here, by the way, is the Mount of Olives. Over here is the Watershed Ridge. So, again, same dynamic, two hills, three valleys. Here are the three valleys as Todd lays them out. There is the Kidron, then there is the Hinnom. Notice again, look at the map. This is that modern city walls, but they're there today. They get in the way, but more importantly, here's the Western Hill. Here's the Eastern Hill. So you got these three valleys, the Hinnom on the south and west, the Central Valley, and then the Kidron Valley. To the east, again, over here, Mount of Olives, over here, Watershed Ridge. All right. And just to belabor the point, here is another map. Now, what you have here, and look closely, this can be helpful. You have to look closely. As a matter of fact, I'm going to try something. I'm going to enlarge it, and I may not be able to draw very well on it. But I want you to see something. First of all, notice that the blue dotted line, this is Bill's map, the blue dotted line is the Western Hill. This is Old Testament Jerusalem, but this is the days of in Hezekiah when it grew up to this Western Hill. So this blue dotted line is the line of the walls in the days of Hezekiah. Here is the Eastern Hill and the little city of David. This is David's city. Here is the Temple Mount. I'm going backwards. So let's start. David's city, then the Temple Mount, which is where Solomon built it, and then later on, Hezekiah brings it over here. All right, so that is that's for instance, and basically it's pretty much close to, there's another little section right here, but otherwise it's pretty much what it was in Jesus' day as well. Now, look at this. Look at this. Look carefully. Stop what you're doing. Look carefully. Notice that here are the Old Testament. It's not going to let me draw once I do that, so I'll do this. Here are those Old Testament walls. Look, here is the modern city wall. You see, it's called here Turkish Wall. Here's the Damascus Gate. We'll go inside. Here's the Jaffa Gate. Here's your hotel right here. Now, the point is, look at this. All of this is the modern city wall. And all of this area up here was outside the city in both Jesus' day and in the Old Testament. So the wall system is misplaced well to the north, about 50% to the north. And we will walk around in this area. We'll be inside the walls, but we're outside the walls of both Jesus' day and the Old Testament. All right, now that's to the north. Get it? To the north, the wall system of today that you're going to become so familiar with is situated mistakenly well to the north of where it was in Bible times, and therefore there is a great deal of area which is inside the modern city walls, which would have been outside the walls in Jesus' day. Now let's go to the south. Notice the same dynamic. Here you have the walls, and this is exactly the line of the walls in both Old Testament and New Testament times. But look at this. Here is the Turkish wall, right here. So what does that mean? Well, it's the exact opposite dynamic. There is much that is outside of the Turkish walls that was inside the walls in Jesus' day. This entire southern part of the city, we call it Mount Zion, this entire area, we're going to walk out here and so on. There's a gate in these Turkish walls right about here called Zion Gate. We're going to walk out of Zion. And notice this, that here are, I'm highlighting here the Turkish walls, the modern Turkish wall. The city of David is entirely outside the modern city wall. There's the modern city wall. The city of David is outside of it. So you can just start getting used to it right now. It's a very important dynamic. I'm going to say it one more time. The city walls are quite the modern city walls on the west and on the east. They pretty much follow the lines of the walls in biblical times. To the north, they're way too far north. To the south, they're way too far north, which means there is a large area in the northern part of the modern walled city, which was outside the walls in Jesus' day and in the Old Testament. And just as significantly, there is a large part of the ancient city, which is outside the modern walls. If that's confusing to you, spend a minute with it. Watch this map. Spend the time. If you look closely, you can see these Turkish walls. You can compare them to the blue and the black and the red and see exactly that dynamic. So the walls are misplaced on the north and the south, and it's about 50% cattywampus. All right, I'm going to keep going. These are some nice shots that we have in these are all Todd's, and they're very, very helpful. He went up, got an airplane, and rented the plane, and took these pictures himself, and then he he superimposes these geographical features. So look, here we are. We're looking from the southwest. All right, now orient yourself. Here are the modern city walls. See that? See those blonde walls? Here is, and this is always the easiest feature to pick out when you're looking at a photograph and so on, that's the Temple Mount. This is north. This is south. Now watch, 2 points to be made here. So you can see those modern city walls. All this area down here should be included in the city. It's outside the city today, but it should be included in the city. Here's that here's that here's that dung gate that I mentioned that you have to go outside of. Not dung gate, Zion gate. There's a dung gate. So this is the city of David. This is the Temple Mount. So together, that is the Eastern Hill. This, all of this, is the Western Hill. So here you have the Central Valley between the Western Hill and the Eastern Hill. You have the Kidron Valley between the Eastern Hill and the Mount of Olives, because this is it, climbing up in the Mount of Olives. And you have the Hinnom on the west and the south, and here is the Watershed Ridge, the Watershed Ridge as we've called it. All right, another picture, similar. Here you are looking from the east. This is the Mount of Olives down here. We're flying above it. Here again, you can see the Temple Mount. You can see these city walls right here that come up this way. Got a little too far there. Come down this way. So the point is, and we're looking to the east. And so right south, always just south of the Temple Mount, is the city of David. Or another way to say it is, between the Central Valley and the Kidron Valley, south of the Temple Mount, is always going to be the city of David. So again, here are our valleys that we've talked about. Kidron Valley, the Central Valley. Again, this is the Western Hill. This is the Eastern Hill. Didn't mean to do that. Go back. This is the Western Hill. Here are the walls. Remember that much of the city of antiquity is outside the modern city walls. That's the Western Hill. So here you have the Hinnom on the west and the south. Here's the Hinnom. Then you have the Kidron on the east between the Eastern Hill and the Mount of Olives. And you have the Central Valley between those two hills. One other thing, the Hinnom Valley comes around and actually joins, and as does the Central Valley. And so now the Kidron Valley south of Jerusalem becomes what's called the United Kidron, because the Hinnom and the Central Valley flow into it, and they're the water that's channeled through them as well. So again, here it is again. Oh, here is yes, I included this. This is Todd's description of these other mountains, what I'm calling the bordering mountains. So you have the Mount of Olives on the east, you have the Watershed Ridge on the right, and he gives us some very nice pictures. Can you orient yourself? I'll give you just a second. Look at that picture. Can you find the Temple Mount? It's almost dead in the middle of the picture. You can see the Dome of the Rock. And if you look just to the south of that, you can see those blonde walls that go over toward the Hinnom Valley and then make their way north. So here is the Temple Mount. Here is that wall system, and here's where it goes north. So there's a dog leg right there. You're going to live at that dog leg. You'll get used to it right here. And again, as what you have here, looking from the south, is this. He's got a little too far to the east, it seems to me, but this is the Watershed Ridge. This is the Mount of Olives. Those are the bordering hills. Here is the Kidron Valley. Here comes the Hinnom Valley. The Central Valley is going to be hard to see, but it comes down like this. So again, here's another one that I like a little better. Here he actually has traced for you the Road of the Patriarchs, or the ridge route on the west, and then the Mount of Olives over here. But again, take a moment, find the Temple Mount. That'll orient you. It's always going to be some green on it because it's got a lot of trees. And then you also see this Dome of the Rock right here. One of the most hideous installations on the face of the earth. But you can see the walls, and then they go north. So same thing. Mount of Olives over here. Eastern Hill here. Here's one interesting feature on this. There's a little road right here. See that blacktop road? And it becomes our best marker for the Central Valley. And this right here is the city of David. Take a minute and look at that. There it is. I'm going to highlight it one more time. Here's the Temple Mount. So just south, here's the Ophel, and then just to the south of the Temple Mount, between the very, very hard to discern Central Valley and the very easy to discern Kidron Valley, just between the two of them, south of Temple Mount, here's the city of David. Now, again, it's a little artificial, but that road right there is kind of high on the shoulder of what would have been the Central Valley in Jesus' day. So there are your two bordering hills, as Todd lays this out for you. A couple other things I got to be quick. The growth of Jerusalem. Now, you need to understand, get this. This is an important concept, and Todd does a good job of this. That's why I'm using his map here. Well, he does a good job of everything, but this is unimprovable, abominable. So there are three distinguishable features which come into play at various stages of the history of the city of Jerusalem. First of all, there is the city of David. That's where it all starts. That's the little Jebusite city that David captures in about 1004 BC. And then to the north is the Temple Mount, purchased by David, the threshing floor where Solomon walled it in and built a temple. And then to the west is this western hill that the city grows up onto in time. So here you have, and I want you to watch this closely now. It's small, but get up close. So here again is and see what's happening here. Now watch this. I've highlighted it for you. So there is the old city. So there's the same set of walls, that trapezoidal wall system we talked about so much, misplaced, and you see it here. Here's the Temple Mount, but notice that the city of David, this little area just highlighted here, is outside the modern city entirely in all of its parts. You got to leave the city of David to get the city of David. Now I'm going to do this for you. Once again, let's fill it all in. Here's the watershed ridge. Here's the Mount of Olives, our bordering hills. Here's the eastern hill. It's the city of David and the Temple Mount. Here's basically, it's a little large there, but there is the western hill, and we have these three valleys, the Kidron, the Hinnom, and the Central. You should be getting close to that. You should be familiar with that. All right, so that's all David ever possessed. Well, that's not quite true. He didn't. That's all he ever walled. Matter of fact, it was walled when he got there, and he maintained that wall system. But along comes Solomon, and David had. Remember, there'd been a plague because of David's wickedness, and the plague had been stopped on a hill north of the city when an angel appeared, and David bought the threshing floor, brought the ark up after he dies. Solomon builds a temple and extends the walls. Now, very important, this is King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was king in Judah when the northern kingdom was carried off to Assyria 722. Before that happened, tens, hundreds of thousands of northern kingdom Israel refugees fled to the south. They began to settle in Jerusalem. They settled on that hill to the west. Hezekiah realized it was his responsibility to protect them, so he extends the walls. That's what's happening there. Now, let me do it again for you here. Here's the eastern hill. Here is the western hill. Here are our valleys. Now, remember that as long as it was only the eastern hill, as right here, you see, it's important that the city be protected by deep valleys which produce steep hillsides that make it hard to attack. Well, when it was only the eastern hill, the guardian valley was the Central Valley, which was very deep and very formidable. Today, it's almost all filled in. We'll show it to you, but it guarded it on the east. On the other hand, when the city grew to the western hill, well, here, as I show you right here, then the valley which guards it on the west is, in fact, the Hinnom Valley, the west and the south. But again, on the east is the Kidron, and then the Central Valley is in between. So that's Hezekiah. Now, of course, that's the city that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and it was leveled. But then the Jews were carried off to Babylon. Persia conquered Babylon, allowed them to return. So now Nehemiah comes back in 444 BC, and he rebuilds the walls in 52 days. And notice that they're basically the same walls as what you had in the days of Solomon. The eastern hill, which is the city of David, and the Temple Mount. On the other hand, during the intertestamental period, the Hasmonean period, it grows up some, and then this is the city in the blue square. This is the city in the days of Jesus. Herod the Great, all throughout Jesus' ministry, this is the city. Now, again, Let me just go back. What you have here is the eastern hill and the western hill, and then a section to the north. And again, in every one of these, this other drawing is the modern city walls. So this right here is the modern city walls, and it's trying to show you that this whole area here are the modern city walls today. All of this to the south was included. Most of this to the north was not included, but we beat that to death. But now let me show you a model. Get the same feel. This is a picture from a model. We'll visit this model, spend a lot of time with it. Over here is the Mount of Olives. This is the Kidron Valley. Now watch, here, this is the model, and this is from the days of Jesus or Herod, but here is the city of David, you see. Here is the Temple Mount. So together, that's the eastern hill. Here, on the other hand, rising up to the east, to the west, is the western hill. Here's the Hinnom. They do. Here's the Hinnom Valley. Here's the Central Valley. So again, that's the New Testament, and that's what's being represented here on this little tiny drawing. But I'm looking at this area to the south, and again, you have the same features: Eastern Hill, Western Hill, Central Valley, Hinnom Valley. Kidron Valley, Hinnom Valley. Same dynamic. There it is again. All right, very quickly, one other point to be made. Here are the old city walls today. We've talked a lot about them. We've seen this picture before. Just know that the city of Jerusalem was destroyed in 135 AD. It was destroyed in 70 AD by Titus Vespasian, but then the Jews came back and began to settle in the city, and they mounted a second rebellion, the Second Jewish Rebellion, 132 and 135. It was put down by a paganizing, very, very effective, efficient emperor, Flavian emperor by the name of Hadrian. And Hadrian rebuilt the city and called it Aelia Capitolina, and he totally destroyed it. And the city we're going to walk around in, and the city that's bordered by this wall system right here, is much more Aelia Capitolina than it is Herod's or Jesus Jerusalem. But one of the features of a Roman city always that it had a primary north-south road called the Cardo. There are actually two divisions to it, and there was a primary east-west road or dividing road called the Decumanus, and it divided up into four quarters, and that's what's being represented today. You have these four quarters. This is I say modern. It's very ancient, but it's post-Bible, and it's very Roman. It's not Jewish, and you got to dig beneath Hadrian's Jerusalem to find Herod's Jerusalem that we're interested in, Jesus Jerusalem. But it is a fact that today you have the Muslim quarter up here, which is dominated primarily by the Temple Mount. You have the Jewish quarter down here where they've always settled. You got this Armenian quarter, which was settled by peoples who were being slaughtered in the late 1800s and fled here, slaughtered by the Muslims up in Armenia between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And then the Christian quarter, so-called because of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Let me just say, these quarters are not dramatic, and you don't have a sense. Every once in a while, you can sense the border between one and the other, but there's nothing legal about them. It's not that only Muslims can live in the Muslim quarter or be in the Muslim quarter. Muslims live all over the city. There's some restrictions, but the fact is that these are the quarters that were defined by the Cardo and the Decumanus, and today they happen to be dominated by in this case, the Temple Mount, thus the Muslim quarter, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, because this is where they've settled from antiquity, and the Armenians, because that's what was available to them when they came in the early part of the 1900s. So just know that that's part of the dynamics of the city. I'm going to close once again. Just let's remember what the psalmist has to say. Great is the Lord and most worthy of his praise in the city of our God, his holy mountain. It is beautiful in its loftiness, the joy of the whole earth, like the utmost of Zaphon in Mount Zion. The heights of Zaphon is Mount Zion. That is the most beautiful mountain way to the north, the city of the great king. For Zion's sake, I'll not keep silent. A couple of other verses. We've already mentioned them. We'll have more to say, but understand Jerusalem, 2 hills, 3 valleys. All right.